And I actually think it's picked up other guys as well, to say, hey, look at that, and he's jumped into it. He's eager to learn every day, and he's getting better and better every day as he learns, know how we do things.
It's wide receivers coach Kenny Guyton on Arkansas wide receiver Matt Landers, who might have been the most talked about wide receiver so far. All of the cornerbacks have gotten questions about him. We'll talk right now with the one and only Mike Irwin from Pig Trail Nation joining us on Halftime here. Mike, appreciate your time, as always, when you join us here on Halftime. How are you?
I'm doing great today. How are you?
Doing all right, man. Doing all right. So yesterday, the wide receivers and Kenny Guyton meet with the media. It is the most, now I say this in terms of like question marks. I don't know if I look at it necessarily as a question mark, more as an opportunity for somebody to step into the void of production at wide receiver. There is no other position group, I think, that has been talked more about in that terms. Maybe you could look at defensive line, but wide receivers, like that's one of the reasons why Arkansas, in some eyes, was voted third by the media in the SEC instead of second. What is your sense of the wide receivers for Arkansas and whether or not they might actually be a better overall group than last year?
Well, there's certainly some indication of that, what we've seen so far, but you do have to acknowledge that Warren Thompson's kind of the only experienced guy coming back that did a lot last year. So that's where the question marks are. But you've got these two transfers, Jaden Hazelwood and Matt Landers. And Landers, as you played the soundbite from Guyton, he's tall, he's fast. He spent a year at Georgia and then transferred to Toledo, and he's just, I think KJ talked about him the first day, how fast he is off the line. And he's impressive. Guys, we're out there for 20 minutes, and then we have to go. The buzzer rings, and we're supposed to leave. Well, if you're smart, you go all the way over to the extreme southwest side of the field, and that gives you the maximum amount of time to walk back to the gate on the other side so you can see these 7-on-7s that take place after the buzzer goes off. And on Sunday, I was making my little slow trek. I'm 74. Nobody can come up to me and go, hey, speed it up, bud. I got an excuse. So I'm walking slow, and I'm looking, and I see Hazelwood, just making a straight line for the goal line, and here comes the pass, and Catalan's all over him. He's just blanketing the guy, and I'm thinking, man, there's no way he catches this pass. And he did. It was amazing. I couldn't believe it. So we're seeing some things like that, and Landers has been impressive. And I think the freshmen, they've got four of them, four stars. It's just, it's the talent is there. It's just a matter of August camp is kind of funky, guys. On my Ask Mike segment, I got a question from a guy that said, you guys are always blowing smoke in August and telling us this and this and that, and then certain things don't happen. All we can report is what little we see, and then you got to go with what the coaches and the players are saying, but the proof is in the games, and that's still ahead of us.
And it's tough sometimes to separate the wheat from the chaff as far as that's concerned, right? I mean, you can take words from a coach, and you might think, well, these words are designed for us to digest, but they're also designed for the player to hear, the opponents that might be, paying attention to some of that stuff too. You never really know what to trust. But I do know I like tall wide receivers. Any quarterback does. And that's one thing that stands out, aside from the speed, which I know stands out here because I think Keytron Jackson can get behind the defense. Hazelwood and Landers certainly can. Satania definitely can. I've heard a lot about Sam Mbake to do the same thing. But they're not just fast. Other than Satania, all of these guys are tall and big. Maybe not the size of Traylon Burks, but, taller than most wide receiver cores, I think, than we've seen.
And what I like from what I've seen so far is the depth, not just at wide receiver, but in the secondary, because you've got some real battles going on there. There's four guys in the mix for those two cornerback spots. That's good. That hasn't been that way in the past. And so, I think there are 22 guys listed in the secondary on this roster. Some of those are walk-ons, but, you got 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm trying to remember in my mind, like 9 or 10 guys in the mix out there. And you've got almost that many at wide receivers. So the depth And then I think it was Dominic Bowman, the cornerbacks coach, who said, iron sharpens iron. And what we're doing out there every day is what you don't want to see is you don't want one group to dominate, wide receivers or secondary. And you're getting back and forth. One looks good on one play, and then here comes another play from the defense, and then a wide receiver. And that's where your iron sharpens iron, because on the first day, KJ Jefferson threw a key interception to Hudson Clark, and instead of just kind of blowing it off, he said, "Look, I have to learn from that." That was in a key situation where it was win the game or lose the game on a drive, a 2-minute drill, and he won it for the defense. So we don't want to do that in a game. So you got this back and forth going on, and I think that obviously has to help. And when you have depth, I think that's the big thing that Pittman has done over the last 3 recruiting cycles, is he's added depth to this team, not just bringing in freshmen, but heavily in the portal, because they got a couple of guys out of the portal in that secondary that are really helping.
And is it safe to say, and I think when you look at depth, offensively, there's maybe a little more depth than on the defensive side, outside of the secondary, like you just mentioned. And I do worry a bit about depth at linebacker after Bumper Poole and Drew Sanders. You're waiting to see somebody to step into a role, and they really haven't had a chance to play very much, anybody that's going to be in that position. And defensive line, whether it be tackle or defensive end, you get the sense there's just going to be a lot of rotation on the defensive line very early in the season to get a sense of who can get a push. Because that also, I'm not worried about offensive production in any sense, but defensively, pressure on the defense. I mean, they're not replacing anybody that really produced a lot as far as getting into the backfield, getting to the cornerback or tackles for losses. And no one that's there right now, outside of maybe Dominic, the transfer out of Georgia Tech, was all that productive from in another spot.
Oh, absolutely. That's where the question is, stopping the run, and then they obviously want to get to the passer, get to the quarterback. And so are they going to have that? Are they going to have that pass rush? Are they going to be able to, do they get good run support from what happens when if one of those linebackers goes down? So there are definitely more question marks on that side of the ball. But what I do think, the offensive line is another area that's just gotten better and better, and you knew that was going to happen under Pittman. And I think what you're going to see this year is, we saw a little bit of it last year. You get into the second half, and you get maybe a 10-point lead, maybe anything more than a touchdown lead, and I think you're going to see them try to do ball control, burn up the clock, and that keeps your defense off the field. That sort of covers up if you've got any kind of defensive issues, if you can ball control and shorten the length of the game.
Mm-hmm. Now, Mike, one position that I don't think anybody's too worried about is running back, because you got Rocket Sanders and Dominique Johnson, A.J. Green, even the talented freshman coming in. But how well has A.J. Green kind of shown that he can be a little bit more productive, especially with Dominique Johnson probably going to be out for game 1?
There's an assumption sort of through the first, and I'm just talking media, us asking questions, and the general flow of the conversation. There's kind of almost been an assumption that it's just all Rocket Sanders, rocket. I even had a guy try to tell me the other day. I mean, we're going back to a more traditional starter gets all the reps, and I just don't agree with that. I think A.J. Green is too good to leave back there. I mean, what he does very well, what they all do very well, is if you combine the offensive line and some things Pittman talked about with the way they're doing their blocking, their zone blocking, where it's not pushing forward, it's almost a sidestep, and they're moving in a certain direction. And when a defense watches that offensive line move and then they see movement behind it, you just naturally go in that direction, and these backs do a great job of cutting back and ending up on the opposite side of the field than where they started. And I think Green does that very well. Rocket does it really well. And I think when Johnson gets back, he plays. I just don't think this is a one guy is out there for 90% of the reps thing. I think you got 3 guys like that, you got to play all of them.
Mm-hmm. No, I completely agree. You've got so much talented in that backfield that you've got to utilize as much of it as you possibly can throughout a 60-minute football game. With the running game, though, have you gotten a sense that the number of carries for KJ Jefferson, not only they would like to go down, are going to try to, I guess, maybe scheme some things to where he doesn't get as mobile?
Yeah, I think maybe so. You always run the risk of him getting hurt. You can't protect him totally, but that would be a disaster if that happened. And they were very lucky that it didn't happen last year. So yeah, I think maybe they'd like him, to be more, use his running backs more, throw more, and be more reluctant. Don't take off unless you really got an opening, and then get down very quickly if it looks like you're about to be tackled. He's lost a little bit of weight. He's a little bit quicker, but I don't think it's significant. Somebody was worried about that. I saw one of the discussions on Facebook. I love to go to Facebook and read Razorback fans discussing this stuff. And a guy was afraid that by losing weight he was going to get hurt. He still looks like a linebacker. He's still over 240 as a quarterback. So I don't think there are any worries. But people sometimes get too hung up on, as if you're big, you're not going to get hurt. I've seen injuries are random. You can't track them along any particular thing. And so he could get hurt whether he weighed 245 or 240 or 235 or whatever. So I don't see it significant that he's lost this weight. I think it was his idea. He wanted to do it. He feels more comfortable, and I'm fine with that.
Mike, I love your strategy of squeezing as much as you can out of watching practice. That's a veteran move,
great idea.
Because
I'm stealing it for sure.
How long ago it was that a limit was put on the amount of time that you can watch practice. But I know you probably used to stick around watching every minute of practice you possibly can. How many extra minutes does being on the far side of the field of practice get you?
Well, it depends on how slow you walk, but I think it can take me up to about 4 minutes to walk. So I see almost a segment.
Why don't you show up with
other guys are
show up with a limp? Bring some crutches. You could get an extra 4 more minutes. Turn it into. You'll be the only guy that gets like almost half an hour if you just show up in crutches. Well,
you got to get all the way down to the south part of the grass field, because then that allows you to come all the way around, and then you go behind the north part of it, and then you're on your way out, and you can still look back as you're going over to the synthetic field. And, so I think I can get an extra 4 or 5 minutes out of it.
Brilliant.
And no one said anything to me yet. Kyle hasn't said, "Hey, get moving, bub. I know what you're up to."
Yeah,
maybe. I hope he's not listening. He might change his strategy on that. But this is my 48th August camp, and things have certainly changed. The first one I went to, Frank Broyles had no rules. You could shoot whatever you wanted. You watched the whole thing. Man, has all that changed over the years.
You could talk to him. You could talk to anyone you wanted as well. I mean, you had relationships with the athletes, relationships with the coaches. It's much different now. If you have any relationship with them, it's really just in press conferences, or if you're able to develop something somehow off the field in these guys' limited free time, which there's hardly any of.
Yeah, that's the big difference. Everything now is, people said to me, you don't ask very many questions in press conferences. Why do I want to ask a question that everybody else has the answer to? I just kind of steal from everybody else as I sit there. But I really miss the one-on-one stuff. When in the old Broyles Center, when you could walk down on that second floor, and guys, there were unwritten rules. What you did was you walked down that hallway, and if a coach's door was open, then you looked. And if he was looking down at his desk and writing or seemed busy, you didn't bother him. But if he looked up and made eye contact with you and said hi, then you walked to the door and started to talk, and you might get 15 minutes out of a guy. This would be 12:30, 1 o'clock before they started all their stuff. You had to know when to be in there. But this is where I love being able to, the biggest issue with Sam, and he's a great guy, but he does everything based on Kirby Smart, because Kirby was like his mentor as a head coach there, and Kirby Smart didn't want his assistants talking to the media. These things we're getting this week, it'll be the last time we talk to some of these assistant coaches in a year.
Right.
And I don't like that. I love talking to these guys because you learn things that you're not going to learn from a head coach who's talking in generalities and not talking about specific guys like they are who are part of their position group.
Drew, the way he's describing, the way that Mike used to try to figure out who you can talk to in the locker room or in the coach's office. That's exactly the way I went about getting information doing Henderson State football. In the offices, if the coach's door is closed, leave him alone. If his head is down and the door is open, leave him alone. If they see you walk by and they say something, hey, time for relationship building. It was that simple. He's just not like that in Division I.
No, it's not. That's how you got to do it if you definitely get the opportunity. Mike, real quick, I do want to ask you your thoughts on the basketball team from yesterday. And, do you like what you see? I mean, how much of it do you actually fully take in?
Well, I liked it because, when you win by 49 points, you may not know a lot about the opponent. But I do know that European players, while they may not be as talented, they're not as long, they play good defense. And they did force Arkansas into 11 turnovers. They did hold their own on the boards. What I saw was the thing that impressed me the most were the assists. You had 13 assists by your 2 point guards, 13 by two guys. I didn't even go and add up the rest of them. But you had a lot of these lob passes. Now, Muss was talking about the 11 turnovers, and some of those came on bounce passes. You don't want you bounce passing the ball. That's a risk. And they lob pass so well. But 11 turnovers, we'll see, guys. But I think when the season's over, 11 will be about the norm for this team because of the way they play, and it's not bad. When you move up and down the floor as well as they do, and you're trying to go from this guy to that guy to this guy without putting the ball on the floor, you're going to get a few turnovers. But he didn't like the turnovers, and then he didn't like the bounce passes, and I think he felt like they gambled a little too much on defense. There were some times when they, when their defense wasn't maybe as good as it was at other times. The way I looked at it, it looked like they just kind of would have a burst. Nolan's teams used to do that. You'd have a burst of defense, which created offense, and then you'd have a little bit of a lag. And so I think that's when you had some of those defensive breakdowns, when they just had a flurry of points, and they went, well, let's relax here for a while.
BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports, contests, and events with first-to-market odds and lines. Find reviews and news for every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports information, from live in-game betting, props, and futures. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to join today and make your first sports bet. Use our promo code BELIEVE50 to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. That's BELIEVE, BLEAV 50. That's BELIEVE, BLEAV 50. Bet online, where the game starts.